They told him she didn't belong. He decided to make sure they never said it again. 3 weeks earlier, Nora Callahan stood in the lobby of Hale and Whitford Consulting, holding a cardboard box of her belongings while 40 co-workers watched, and nobody said a word. Nora Callahan stood in the lobby of Hale and Whitford Consulting with a cardboard box pressed against her stomach. Her oversized heather gray cardigan hung off one shoulder. The thin silver wristwatch on her left wrist, the one with the scratched face she'd worn every day since college, caught the fluorescent light and threw a dull glint across the box's contents. A mug, a calculator, a framed certificate nobody had ever asked about. 40 people watched her from behind their monitors. Not one of them said a word. But let's rewind. 6 hours, that same morning. Nora had arrived at the office at 6:45, a full hour before anyone else, because that's what she did. That's what she'd always done. Her scuffed black flats whispered across the carpet as she moved through the empty rows of desks toward her workstation in the back corner, the one without a window, the one next to the supply closet. She logged into the system she'd built from scratch over the past 11 months, a forensic logistics framework for Hale and Whitford's single largest client, a $38 million supply chain restructure spanning 14 distribution centers across the Midwest. Every routing algorithm, every vendor dependency map, every cost reduction model that had saved the client $4.6 million in the first 2 quarters alone. Nora built it. Nora maintained it. Nora was the only person in the building who understood how the pieces connected. She tucked a strand of thick auburn hair behind her ear and started running the morning audit. Her gray-green eyes moved across the data with the quiet focus of someone who genuinely loved the architecture of complex systems. The pale freckles across her nose caught the blue glow of the screen. Her full figure settled into the narrow desk chair the way it always did, with the armrests digging into her broad hips, because nobody had ever thought to order her a different one, and she had never thought to ask. By 8:30, the floor was full. By 9:15, Garrett Hale's assistant appeared at her desk with a tight smile and 2 words: conference room. The conference room at Hale and Whitford had glass walls, floor to ceiling. Every single person on the open floor could see inside. This was by design. Garrett Hale liked an audience. He was already seated when she walked in, leaned back in his chair with his legs spread wide, his ill-fitting Navy Brooks Brothers suit bunching at the shoulders, his yellow tie knotted crooked as always. He clicked his Mont Blanc pen. Click, click, click. His thin gold reading glasses were pushed up on his forehead, and his pale, watery eyes tracked her as she lowered herself into the chair across from him. His thinning, sandy blonde hair, going gray at the temples, was combed over and lacquered so stiff it looked like it would crack if you touched it. He didn't offer her water. He didn't close the door. Nora. Click, click. We've decided to move in a different direction with the Whitfield Lang account, and with your position generally. Her stomach dropped. Her hands found each other under the table, fingers lacing tight across her midsection. I'm sorry, what direction? The Q3 numbers just came in, and we're ahead of... It's not about numbers. He said it like she was slow, like she'd missed something obvious. The small, brownish birthmark on his left earlobe caught the light as he tilted his chin up. This is a client-facing role, Nora. It requires a certain... presentation. He let that word hang. Presentation. And then he said the rest loud enough that his voice carried clean through the open door, across the floor, to every single desk. You're not what people expect when they hire a consulting firm, Nora. You take up too much space in every room you walk into. That's what he said to her. That's the sentence he chose. A woman who'd saved his biggest client nearly $5 million, and he looked at her soft, rounded cheeks flushed pink with shock, looked at her full, heavy thighs pressed together under the table, and decided the only thing that mattered was the number on the scale. Nora tried. God, she tried. Her voice came out thin and shaking. The Whitfield Lang restructure, that's my system. I built the entire... Anyone can learn a spreadsheet. He clicked the pen one final time and set it down like a gavel. Security appeared at the glass door. 2 men in black polos who wouldn't meet her eyes. They walked her back to her desk. They watched her pack her box. They escorted her across the floor past 40 coworkers who sat in perfect silence, and not a single one of them stood up. Her $62,000 salary, gone. That night, Nora stood at the kitchen counter of her studio apartment in Rogers Park, 400 square feet of water-stained ceiling and a radiator that clanked like a dying engine. She ate ramen from the pot because doing dishes felt like too much. Her thick auburn hair fell loose around her face, and tears ran down her rounded cheeks, past the faint freckles, dropping into the broth. She cataloged her failures the way she cataloged everything, methodically, completely. 3 jobs in 5 years, 3 different versions of the same conversation. Too big, too much, too visible in all the wrong ways, invisible in all the ones that mattered. $23,000 in student debt. No savings. The thin silver wristwatch ticked on her wrist like a countdown to nothing. 3 weeks crawled by. Nora sent out 41 applications. She sat through 6 interviews where hiring managers' eyes dropped to her body before she finished her first sentence. One of them, a man in a startup hoodie who couldn't have been older than 25, actually leaned forward and said, "We need someone who can keep up physically with the pace here." She nodded. She thanked him for his time. She walked to the bus stop and stood in the rain for 20 minutes because she'd stopped buying coffee to save the $4. Her checking account hit $400, then $360, then $312. On a Tuesday night in October, Nora sat at the Formica counter of a diner on West Division Street. Rain streaked the windows in long silver lines. A $3 coffee cooled in front of her untouched. Her phone screen glowed with another rejection email. "We've decided to pursue candidates whose qualifications more closely align." And her gray-green eyes stared through it at nothing. Her shoulders hunched forward under the gray cardigan. The small, light birthmark on the right side of her neck, just below her ear, was the only thing that moved, pulsing faintly with her heartbeat. Outside, a black Rolls-Royce Phantom glided to the curb like a knife through silk. The rain parted around it. The rear door opened, and a man stepped out into the wet Chicago night. Tall, broad-shouldered, military straight spine, charcoal Tom Ford 3-piece suit that fit him like it had been sewn onto his body. Dominic Valenti. She didn't know his name yet. She didn't know that he'd been looking for her. She didn't know that everything, every humiliation, every silent coworker, every rejection email was about to become someone else's problem. Dominic Valenti walks into the diner, sits across from Nora without asking, and slides a black leather folder across the table. Just like that. No introduction. No, "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" He folds himself into the cracked vinyl booth like he owns the building, and honestly, for all Nora knows, maybe he does. Rain drips from the shoulders of that charcoal Tom Ford suit. His dark eyes, nearly black under those heavy, straight brows, fix on her face with a stillness that makes the air in the diner feel thinner. Nora's hand tightens around her coffee mug. Her gray-green eyes dart from the folder to his face and back. The silver wristwatch on her left wrist catches the fluorescent light, its scratched face ticking away seconds that suddenly feel enormous. "Nora Callahan," he says, not a question. Her stomach drops. The oversized heather gray cardigan she's wrapped in like armor suddenly feels paper thin. She opens her mouth, and what comes out is barely a whisper. How do you know my name?" He doesn't blink. The platinum signet ring on his right hand catches light as he taps the black folder once. That engraved V gleams like a warning. "I know about the supply chain project, the one Hale took credit for. $38 million routed through 7 distribution channels across 4 states without triggering a single audit flag." He pauses, lets that land. "My people have been watching Hale and Whitford for months. Not for the firm, for you." Nora's blood goes cold because she knows that name. Everyone in Chicago knows that name, even if they only know it the way you know the shape of something moving under dark water. Valenti. The word gets whispered in back offices and loading docks, and the kind of restaurants where the maitre d' never writes anything down. Whispered, never spoken aloud. She should get up. She should leave right now. She doesn't move. Dominic reads her face with terrifying patience. That square jaw with its slight cleft doesn't tighten. Those thin, firm lips don't curl into a sales pitch. He just watches her arrive at the conclusion on her own. And when she does, he doesn't deny a damn thing. You built a logistics ghost network that moved $38 million without a single audit flag, he says again, slower this time, like he wants her to hear every word twice. My people cannot do that. The folder sits between them. Nora doesn't touch it. I'm offering you a position, forensic logistics and financial architecture. His voice drops half a register. $400,000 a year. Coffee catches in Nora's throat. She coughs, sputters, presses the back of her hand to her full, plush lips, while heat floods up her neck and across those rounded cheeks with their faint scatter of pale freckles. 400,000. She was making 60 at Hale and Whitford, and even that felt generous for someone they treated like furniture. Dominic's gaze drops to her coffee mug. Just coffee. Nothing else on the counter in front of her. No plate, no napkin, no crumbs. He clocks it instantly. She's been nursing that single cup because it's the cheapest thing on the menu, and her bank account is a flat line, and he knows it. Without looking away from her, he raises 2 fingers toward the waitress. Bring her the breakfast plate, eggs, bacon, toast, hash browns, and more coffee. Nora's face burns. Her arms cross over her midsection, that old protective reflex, thick fingers gripping the cardigan sleeves. You don't have to eat. One word, a command that somehow sounds like kindness. His dark eyes hold hers, and there is nothing in them, nothing, that resembles judgment. No pity either. Something else, something closer to recognition. You don't apologize for being hungry in front of me. Not now, not ever. The plate arrives. Golden hash browns, eggs glistening, bacon still crackling. Nora stares at it like it might disappear. Then she picks up a fork, and Dominic Valenti watches her eat with open, unhurried satisfaction, the way someone watches a machine finally given the fuel it was built to run on. His large, scarred hands rest flat on the table. He doesn't check his phone. He doesn't look away. She eats every bite. And somewhere between the second piece of toast and the last forkful of eggs, something unclenches in her chest. Just a fraction, just enough to let her think clearly. I'm not a criminal, she says, quiet, firm, her gray-green eyes lifting to meet his. He tilts his head. 1 degree. I'm offering you a desk, not a gun. What you do with numbers is worth more than what any of my men do with anything else. Silence. Rain hammers the diner windows. The Rolls-Royce waits at the curb like a held breath. I need time, Nora says. He reaches into his breast pocket and produces a card. Matte black. No name. Just a phone number embossed in dark gray, almost invisible unless you tilt it toward the light. He sets it beside her empty plate and stands. 6'2" of controlled, deliberate power rising from that booth without a single wasted movement. Take the night, he says, and then he's gone. Nora sits in her studio apartment at 11 p.m. with her laptop open on the mattress. The thin silver wristwatch ticks on her wrist. The matte black card sits on the pillow beside her like a dare. She searches his name. What she finds is layers. Legitimate businesses stacked like camouflage over something vast and dark. Real estate holdings, import companies, a restaurant group, a private security firm, all clean on paper, all connected by threads that someone like her can almost see vibrating. She closes the laptop, opens her banking app. The number stares back at her, blunt and merciless. $387. She picks up the card. She calls. A black sedan arrives at 7 the next morning. The driver doesn't speak. Nora climbs in wearing the same wrinkled navy blouse under the same heather gray cardigan, her dark auburn hair tucked behind her ears, her scuffed black flats already damp from the sidewalk. The Ritz-Carlton Chicago rises above Michigan Avenue like a monument to a world she's never been invited into. The penthouse suite smells like leather and sandalwood. Dominic stands by the window in a fresh suit, Macallan 18 already in hand at 7 in the morning, and he introduces her to the operation with 3 words. This is everything. 14 shell companies, $1.2 billion in assets spread across screens mounted on the far wall like a war room, and a hemorrhaging problem. Someone inside is stealing, and his men have spent 4 months and come up with nothing. Nora, now standing in the penthouse suite of the Ritz-Carlton Chicago, stares at a wall of screens showing the financial architecture of Dominic's empire. $1.2 billion in assets across 14 shell companies, and realizes she can see exactly where the money is bleeding. She sat down at the desk and the world went quiet. Not metaphorically. Nora Callahan literally stopped hearing the hum of the Ritz-Carlton's climate control, the muffled traffic 37 floors below on East Pearson, the soft click of Dominic's lieutenant shifting his weight by the door. All of it vanished. Because the numbers were talking, and they were screaming. Her gray-green eyes tracked across 3 monitors, 14 shell companies, $1.2 billion in assets spread across them like a nervous system. And right there, pulsing like an infected wound, the bleed. She could see it. The way some people see faces in clouds, Nora Callahan saw fraud in financial architecture. It was the thing nobody had ever rewarded her for, the thing Garrett Hale had buried under a pile of humiliation and an oversized cardigan. But it was real, and it was devastating. Her fingers moved across the keyboard. The thin, silver wristwatch on her left wrist caught the light from the monitors, its scratched face ticking steadily as she worked. She pulled transaction records, cross-referenced routing numbers, built a map in her head first, then started transferring it to the whiteboard mounted on the penthouse wall. 90 minutes. That's all it took. 7 layers of shell transactions. Funds routed through a Cayman holding company into a Delaware LLC, into a Nevada trust, into a Canadian import firm back through a second Cayman entity, through a Panamanian freight account, and finally into a personal brokerage in Zurich. $4.2 million. Skimmed clean over 18 months by someone who knew exactly where the cameras weren't pointed. She mapped every node on the whiteboard in blue marker, drew the connections in red, wrote the dollar amounts at each transfer point, circled the Zurich endpoint 3 times. Dominic's lieutenant, a man named Caruso who'd been with the organization 15 years, who had a face like carved granite and hands that had done things Nora didn't want to think about, stood in front of that whiteboard and said absolutely nothing. His jaw worked once, twice. He looked at the board the way a man looks at a magic trick he can't explain. Dominic Valenti stood behind Nora's chair. He wasn't looking at the whiteboard. He was looking at her. At the flush spreading across her rounded cheeks, the cluster of pale freckles on the bridge of her nose catching the blue glow of the monitors, the way her full plush lips moved silently as she double-checked her own work. The platinum signet ring engraved with a V caught the light as he rested one scarred hand on the back of her chair, not touching her, just close enough that she could smell the sandalwood cologne. His dark brown eyes, nearly black beneath those heavy, straight brows, never left her face. What took his men 4 months of dead ends, she'd traced in an hour and a half, and that was only the beginning. The inner circle found out fast. Word travels quick in organizations built on paranoia, and by the next morning, Marco Ferretti knew everything. Marco, wiry, tan-bed bronze, slicked-back hair gleaming under every light source, stood in the hallway outside Dominic's office, flicking his matte black DuPont lighter open and closed, his narrow hazel eyes burning with something uglier than suspicion. He didn't trust outsiders. He especially didn't trust a plus-size woman in a wrinkled navy blouse who'd materialized from a parking garage humiliation and somehow landed in the penthouse. His sharp, pointed chin jutted forward when he talked about her, the small, pale birthmark at the corner of his right jaw flexing with his clenched teeth. Elena Morozova was quieter about it. Quieter and worse. She handled Dominic's legitimate business fronts, the restaurants, the import company, the real estate holdings, and she'd been angling for years to expand her territory. platinum blonde hair draped over one shoulder, ice blue eyes tracking Nora through every room like a scope finding range. The slim gold Cartier bangle on her right wrist caught the light as she leaned toward Marco in a doorway and whispered two words that would become a campaign. "She's not one of us." 3 days after the whiteboard, a stylist arrived at the penthouse. Nora didn't ask for one. Dominic didn't ask permission. Custom-tailored clothing, a dark emerald wrap dress, size 20, cut with surgical precision to follow every curve of her body, the thick waist, the broad hips, the full, heavy thighs. Louboutin heels in black patent leather, a structured blazer in charcoal wool that made her shoulders look like architecture instead of apology. She stood in front of the bathroom mirror and her breath caught. The woman staring back had dark auburn hair falling in thick waves around her face, gray-green eyes wide with something she couldn't name, a soft, rounded jawline above a neck where a small, light birthmark sat just below her right ear. The dress didn't hide her body, it held it, presented it, said, "This is exactly what's here and you will look at it." Her shoulders still hunched forward, her arms still crossed over her midsection. Old armor dies hard, but the clothes fit, actually fit, for the first time in her adult life, and something cracked open in her chest that she wasn't ready to examine. She wore the emerald dress to her first operational meeting, and she restructured the payment routing for 3 of Dominic's operations before the coffee got cold. Saved $800,000 a month in exposure by collapsing redundant transfer points and rerouting through entities that couldn't be subpoenaed together. Identified a second internal leak. Smaller, maybe $200,000 total, but proof that the rot wasn't isolated. Dominic's men noticed. Hard not to. The woman who'd been invisible at a logistics firm was now sitting at the table where decisions about millions were made, and she was making better ones than anyone else in the room. 2 weeks later, the private gathering. Dominic's Lakeshore Drive mansion, limestone and old money, 20 people from the inner circle. Dinner in a room with 12-foot ceilings and oil paintings that cost more than Nora's entire former annual salary of $60,000. Elena Morozova watched Nora reach for a slice of chocolate torte, her matte red lips curved into something surgical. "Careful, sweetheart. The dessert table isn't going anywhere." Loud enough for the nearest 8 people to hear, quiet enough to deny later. Nora's hand froze over the plate. The flush hit her rounded cheeks like a slap. Her gray-green eyes dropped to the tablecloth. The old shame flooded back. Every cafeteria, every break room, every moment someone watched her eat and made her feel like a crime was being committed. Across the room, Dominic Valenti went still. The Macallan 18 in his hand stopped halfway to his lips. His dark eyes found Elena. The small beauty mark on his left cheekbone seemed to darken against his suddenly tight jaw. He didn't speak. Not yet. After dinner, Nora stepped into the hallway alone. She needed air. She needed 30 seconds where nobody was measuring her, weighing her, calculating her worth per pound. Marco Ferretti was already there. Leaning against the wall, matte black lighter flicking open and closed, the slim gold chain at his open collar catching the hallway sconces, his hollow cheeks shadowed as he smiled at her, and it was the emptiest smile she'd ever seen. "You're a fat little accountant playing dress-up in a world that eats people like you alive. You don't belong here." He stepped closer, hazel eyes flat and mean. "Dominic's amusing himself. That's all you are. Amusement. And when he's done, he'll throw you out like the rest of the trash." Nora's hands trembled at her sides. Her chin dropped. The old posture, the old surrender, every instinct screaming to make herself smaller, to take up less space, to disappear. Behind Marco, silent as death, Dominic appeared. Dominic didn't yell. That's the part that mattered. That's the part that made every man in that mansion understand something fundamental had shifted. He stood behind Marco Ferretti for exactly 3 seconds. 3 seconds of absolute silence in that hallway, while Marco's last word, "Here," still hung in the air like smoke from a cheap cigarette. Nora saw it happen. She saw Dominic's dark eyes, almost black under the hallway sconces, fix on the back of Marco's slicked-back head with the kind of focus a surgeon gives a tumor. The platinum signet ring on his right hand caught the light as his fingers uncurled, slow and deliberate. Then he moved. One hand, back of Marco's neck. Not a grab, a placement, like he was positioning something on a shelf. Dominic walked Marco Ferretti sideways into the nearest wall, and the sound Marco's shoulder made against that plaster was the only loud thing in the entire exchange. Nora pressed herself against the opposite wall, her silver wristwatch catching on her oversized cardigan sleeve, her gray-green eyes wide. Dominic leaned in, inches from Marco's face, and he spoke at a volume meant for one person. "Say it again." Marco's hazel eyes went glassy. His matte black DuPont lighter slipped from his fingers and clattered on the hardwood. "Say one more word about her." Dominic's jaw barely moved. The small, dark beauty mark near his left eye seemed to sharpen in the low light. "I want you to." Marco couldn't speak. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. The bronze tan bed color drained from his face like someone had pulled a plug, leaving him gray and waxy under that tight, gel-slicked hair. Dominic held him there for 5 more seconds. 5 seconds that probably felt like 5 years, then released his grip, stepped back, straightened his charcoal Tom Ford jacket with one precise tug at each French cuff. Marco left the mansion white-faced and silent, didn't look at Nora, didn't look at anyone. By morning, every soldier, every lieutenant, every driver and doorman in Dominic Valenti's organization knew exactly what had happened in that hallway, and exactly what it meant. You don't talk about her. Period. Elena Morozova was smarter than Marco. She'd watched the whole thing from the end of the corridor, one hand resting on her slim hip, her platinum blonde hair draped over one shoulder, those ice-blue eyes calculating. She didn't confront Nora, didn't say a word to her face. Elena understood that direct attacks were off the table now, so she went surgical. Over the next 48 hours, bad data started flowing into Nora's workspace. Subtle stuff. Transposed digits in wire transfer confirmations, deprecated routing numbers swapped into active accounts, a $340,000 Cayman Islands transaction time-stamped at 2:14 a.m. on a Tuesday that should have flagged but was buried under 3 layers of legitimate payroll. Elena fed it in carefully, patiently, the way you'd poison a well one drop at a time. The goal was elegant. Make Nora look incompetent. Make her miss something. Make Dominic question whether his fat little accountant was actually worth the trouble. Nora noticed the discrepancies within 6 hours. Because here's the thing about Nora Callahan that Elena Morozova fundamentally did not understand. Nora didn't just read numbers. She felt them. The way a musician hears a wrong note in a symphony, Nora felt a corrupted data set in her bones. The Cayman transaction sat wrong. The routing number tasted stale. She pulled the thread, and the whole thing unraveled in her hands like cheap yarn. She found Elena in the second-floor office of the Lakeshore Drive mansion, closed the door behind her. Her hands were shaking. She could feel the tremor in her fingers, could feel the old instinct to apologize, to shrink, to make herself smaller in front of this tall, angular woman in her cream Valentino sheath dress and gold stiletto heels. The flush crept across Nora's rounded cheeks, across the pale freckles on the bridge of her nose. But the numbers didn't lie. And Nora didn't either. You moved $340,000 through the Cayman account at 2:14 a.m. on Tuesday. Her voice caught slightly on the first sentence, just slightly. The routing number you used was deprecated 6 weeks ago. She set down a printed ledger, every transaction highlighted, every timestamp circled. You wanted me to miss it. Elena's matte red lips parted, the tiny beauty mark above her upper lip twitched. I didn't. 2 words, quiet as a closing door. Elena stared at the ledger like it was a warrant. When Dominic learned what Elena had done, he didn't raise his voice then either. He simply made a call. Within the hour, Elena Morozova's access to every financial system in the organization was revoked. Every account, every ledger, every encrypted channel. She wasn't removed, that would have been merciful. She was reduced. Reassigned to managing a single legitimate restaurant front on the South Side, a place that cleared maybe $11,000 a month. Elena's hatred of Nora crystallized in that moment into something cold and patient and genuinely dangerous. But that's a problem for later. Right now, Nora sat in Dominic's private study on the 3rd floor, and she was so tired she could feel it in her teeth. The kind of exhaustion that lives in your marrow. Her thick auburn hair fell loosely around her face, and her shoulders curved forward the way they always did when she was trying to disappear. Dominic poured Macallan 18 into 2 heavy crystal glasses. The amber liquid caught the lamplight. He set one glass in front of her, and she watched his scarred knuckles wrap around the other. He looked at her. Really looked at her. At the soft fullness of her face, the gentle downward turn of her gray-green eyes, the small birthmark on the right side of her neck below her ear. You take up exactly the space you are meant to. 9 words. She felt every single one of them land somewhere beneath her ribs, somewhere she'd kept locked and dark for 27 years. Her eyes filled, not sadness, shock. The shock of being seen by someone who wasn't flinching. He set his glass down, crossed to her chair, and he lifted her, all 230 pounds of Nora Callahan, from that chair and carried her to the leather sofa. No strain in his arms, no grunt, no comment, no hesitation. He held her against his broad chest like she was the most valuable thing in that room, because to Dominic Valenti, she was. He traced the curve of her waist with one scarred hand, followed the line of her heavy thigh, let his palm rest flat against her soft stomach, not avoiding it, not skipping past it, settling there with intention. Every inch, he said. She'd never been touched like this, never been wanted like this. The shame she'd carried her entire life, every sideways glance, every cruel comment, every time she'd skipped a meal in public because she couldn't stand being watched while she ate. It cracked open inside her chest, and something ferocious started growing in its place. The next morning, Nora wakes in Dominic Valenti's penthouse bed wearing his shirt, and for the first time in her life, she doesn't suck in her stomach when she stands up. Let that sit for a second. 27 years of pulling in, of bracing, of making herself physically smaller every single time she moved from horizontal to vertical, and this morning, she just stands. The white dress shirt hangs open at the collar, brushing mid-thigh against her full, heavy thighs, and she catches her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking Lake Michigan, and she doesn't flinch. The gray-green eyes looking back at her are calm, the soft, rounded jawline, the faint cluster of pale freckles across the bridge of her nose, the dark auburn waves falling loose around her face. She sees all of it, and she doesn't apologize. That was the last morning Nora Callahan was invisible to anyone, because what happens next is a transformation so fast, so total, it rewrites the physics of every room she enters. Within the week, she's walking into meetings at the Drake Hotel in a Roland Mouret sheath dress, size 20, cut like body armor, the fabric curving exactly with her broad hips and thick waist instead of trying to pretend they don't exist. Tom Ford blazers tailored so precisely they might as well be weapons grade. Custom everything. And around her neck, on a fine platinum chain, Dominic Valenti's signet ring. The heavy one. The V. She doesn't hunch anymore. The shoulders that spent years curled forward, arms crossed over her midsection like a permanent apology, they're back now, squared. And the men in those meetings, the ones who used to look right through her like she was furniture, they watch her walk in and they go quiet. Not polite quiet, wary quiet. The kind of silence that means the room just recalculated the threat level and came up with a number they didn't expect. Good. Here's the thing about Nora's brain, and we've seen flashes of this, but this is where it goes nuclear. A rival organization has been trying to undercut Dominic's shipping operation for months. His people knew money was moving wrong. They could smell it, But they couldn't find it, couldn't trace it, couldn't untangle the web of shell companies and offshore accounts fast enough to act. Months of work. Dead ends, frustrated soldiers staring at spreadsheets like they were written in ancient Greek. Nora does it in a weekend. One weekend. 48 hours. A laptop, 3 monitors, room service from the Ritz-Carlton she barely touches, and a thin silver wristwatch with a scratched face ticking on her left wrist while she dismantles the entire architecture of a $3.2 billion laundering operation. 14 Chicago real estate properties used as wash houses, 6 offshore accounts in Cyprus, the Caymans, and Liechtenstein. Every transaction timestamped, every beneficial owner identified, every transfer mapped to a specific decision-maker in the rival syndicate. She presents her findings to Dominic's full inner circle on a Tuesday morning. Picture this room. 8 men around a mahogany table. Hard men. Men with knuckle scars and suppressed weapons, and the kind of calm that comes from having done terrible things without losing sleep. Marco Ferretti is there, lean and wiry in his fitted black Armani, flicking his matte black DuPont lighter open and closed, hazel eyes narrow and watchful, that permanent tan bed bronze practically glowing with skepticism. Elena Morozova sits at the far end in her cream Valentino sheath, platinum blonde hair draped over one shoulder, ice blue eyes tracking Nora with the patient focus of a predator deciding where to bite. And Nora stands at the head of the table, 230 pounds, size 20, auburn waves tucked behind her ears, the small, light birthmark on the right side of her neck visible above her collar. She doesn't stammer once, not once. She walks them through every layer. The property acquisitions, the timing patterns, the currency conversions designed to avoid reporting thresholds, the shadow directors who thought they were anonymous. She names names. She quotes dollar amounts to the cent, and the room goes so silent you could hear Marco's lighter click from across the building. Dominic Valenti sits at the opposite end of the table, dark eyes fixed on her, and his expression is pure hunger. Not just physical, though that's there, always there, the way his gaze traces the curve of her full figure with open, unapologetic heat. This is something deeper, something more dangerous. He's watching the most brilliant person he's ever met operate at full capacity, and he knows, everyone at this table knows, that she is the most dangerous weapon in this room. Not the guns, not the muscle, her. He speaks once, to the room, not to her. His voice doesn't rise above conversational. Nobody touches what is mine. It's not a threat, it's a geological fact, the kind of statement that doesn't require enforcement because the alternative is too catastrophic to contemplate. But Elena Morozova hears it differently. She hears an expiration date on her own relevance. She hears a plus-size woman in a Tom Ford blazer replacing her at the center of Dominic Valenti's empire. And that slim gold Cartier bangle on her right wrist catches the light as her hand tightens into a fist beneath the table. Within 72 hours, Elena is communicating with the very syndicate Nora just exposed. Encrypted messages, burner phones. She feeds them everything. Nora's location at the Ritz-Carlton, her daily routines, the coffee shop she visits every morning on Michigan Avenue, the fact that she walks alone because she hasn't yet learned to fear the world the way Dominic fears it for her. Elena's pitch to the rival syndicate is surgical. She's the brain. Remove her and Valenti's operation collapses. They see the opportunity. They take it. The attack happens on a Wednesday morning. Nora leaves the Ritz-Carlton for a coffee run. Casual. Normal. 2 men, a black van, hands on her arms before she can scream, zip ties biting into the soft skin of her wrists, a warehouse on the south side that smells like diesel and rust. Elena Morozova's message arrives on Dominic Valenti's phone 12 minutes later. A photo of Nora bound to a chair, mascara streaked down her flushed, rounded cheeks, the birthmark on her neck visible above a bruised collar. The text beneath reads, "Come get your fat little pet." Dominic is holding a glass of Macallan 18 when he reads it. He sets the glass down on the table with perfect, terrifying control. The heavy platinum signet ring on his right hand catches the overhead light. He looks at his men. Every one of them stops breathing. Find her. Bring her back. Kill everyone else. His voice doesn't rise above a whisper. In the warehouse on the south side, Nora Callahan is bound to a metal chair with zip ties, mascara streaked down her flushed cheeks. And she is not panicking. She is counting. 4 men. 2 near the rolling door on the east wall, 1 leaning against a support column scrolling his phone, 1 sitting at a folding table with a laptop open in front of him. The laptop is running FinTrack Pro, a financial routing platform she could navigate blindfolded, drunk, in a hurricane. These men have no idea. They have absolutely no idea what they've dragged into this building. Her wrists burn where the zip ties bite into skin. Her thick, wavy auburn hair hangs loose and wild around her flushed face, and the pale freckles across the bridge of her nose are barely visible under the mascara tracks. The thin, silver wristwatch on her left wrist, scratched face, familiar weight, presses hard against the plastic restraint. She focuses on that pressure, grounds herself in it. She is terrified. Let's be clear about that. Her pulse is hammering somewhere north of 140, her soft, rounded cheeks are burning, and her stomach is clenched so tight she can feel it in her spine. But terror and intelligence are not mutually exclusive. Nora Callahan is terrified, and she is thinking faster than she has ever thought in her life. 3 exits. Rolling door east, personnel door south, a busted window 14 feet up the north wall. The man at the laptop has a Glock on his hip and no idea that the routing number displayed on his screen is wrong. 2 digits transposed. She sees it from 12 feet away, zip-tied to a chair through streaked mascara, because she's always right. She starts small. I need water. The nearest captor, rolling door guy, thick neck, cheap leather jacket, looks at her like she's furniture that just spoke. She says it again, quieter, smaller. The voice she spent years perfecting at Whitmore Lacey. The voice that says, I'm no threat, I'm nothing, please just let me exist. He grabs a half-empty bottle from a crate and holds it to her lips. She drinks. She thanks him. She makes herself soft and grateful. 2 minutes later, I need the bathroom, please. He looks at the guy at the laptop. Laptop guy shrugs. They argue in low voices. She waits, patient as a surgeon. Then she plays her card. Casual, almost bored, like she's mentioning the weather. That routing number on your screen is wrong, by the way. You're about to send $6 million to a custodial account in the Caymans that belongs to a defunct shell corp. It'll bounce, flag an OFAC alert, and the feds will have your IP address in about 40 minutes. Silence. Laptop guy stares at her. His jaw works. He looks at the screen. He looks back at her. She holds his gaze. Gray-green eyes, steady, downturned at the corners, utterly calm. The look of a woman who has been underestimated so many times it stopped hurting and started becoming useful. He checks the routing number. She watches his face change. She's right. She's always right. Untie one hand, she says. I'll fix it. Unless you want to explain to whoever runs your operation why $6 million just evaporated because you couldn't read a 9-digit number. They untie her right hand. This is all she needs. 11 minutes. That's how long it takes Nora Callahan to dismantle a rival syndicate's entire financial infrastructure. 11 minutes while making small talk about whether it's supposed to rain this weekend. Her fingers move across the keyboard with the fluid certainty of someone who thinks in numbers the way other people think in words. She creates 17 ghost accounts across 9 jurisdictions: Liechtenstein, Singapore, Cyprus, the Isle of Man. 4 more she picks because their banking regulators are asleep at the wheel. She reroutes $3.2 billion through those accounts in a cascading chain that would take a forensic team 6 months to unravel. She freezes every asset the rival syndicate owns, every property, every vehicle, every offshore holding, every single dollar, and she sends the complete financial architecture, the entire map, to Dominic Valenti's encrypted server. She does this while telling the laptop guy that Chicago weather is unpredictable this time of year, but she heard the weekend might be nice. He doesn't notice. None of them notice. They see a heavy woman with mascara on her face and raw wrists, hunched slightly forward in an oversized heather gray cardigan, and they see nothing. They see exactly what Garrett Hale saw, what every person in every room has ever seen when they looked at Nora Callahan. That is the last mistake these men will make. The first suppressed round comes through the personnel door on the south wall. A soft punch of sound, like a textbook dropped on carpet. The guy by the column drops. Clean. Instant. Dominic's men pour through both doors simultaneously. Precise, coordinated, surgical. Two more suppressed shots, the crack of a wrist breaking, sharp and wet, like a green branch snapping. Arterial spray hits the concrete wall near the rolling door in a thin red arc. One of the captors tries to run. He makes it 4 steps. Through the aftermath walks Dominic Valenti. Charcoal Tom Ford suit, platinum signet ring engraved with a V catching the overhead fluorescence. Dark eyes scanning the carnage without registering it. He doesn't look down. Not once. He steps over a body the way most people step over a crack in the sidewalk. He is looking for one person. He finds her standing, not sitting in the chair, standing. She freed herself, worked the loosened zip tie off her other wrist sometime during the 11 minutes, probably between ghost accounts 9 and 10. She's standing over the laptop at the folding table, her thick waist squared to the screen, her broad hips steady, her full, heavy frame planted like a woman who has decided she is done being moved. Her wrists are raw and red, mascara still streaked down her flushed, rounded cheeks. Auburn hair wild around her face, the small, light birthmark on the right side of her neck visible beneath her ear. But she's standing. She looks up at him, gray-green eyes steady, and says without stammering, "I handled it." Dominic stares at her. Then he crosses the warehouse floor in 5 long strides, takes her face in both scarred hands, and kisses her like she is oxygen and he has been drowning. Hard, desperate, reverent. He pulls back just enough to speak against her lips. "You are mine," he says, "and I am yours, and nobody in this city will ever touch you again." 1 week after the warehouse, Dominic Valenti announces a gala at the Drake Hotel, and every person who ever made Nora Callahan feel small receives an invitation. $200,000 in flowers alone. White peonies banked against every marble column, cascading arrangements of ivory roses and deep green ferns spilling from crystal vases taller than most of the waitstaff. The Drake Hotel ballroom glows under 3 massive chandeliers, each one worth more than Nora's old annual salary at Hale and Whitford. Every surface gleams. Every detail has been chosen with the kind of precision that only a man who plans violence for a living can bring to beauty. The guest list is a masterpiece of cruelty. Dominic's inner circle fills the front tables, men in bespoke suits who move billions through shadow channels and speak in careful euphemisms. Business associates from New York, from Miami, from overseas. And then there are the others, former co-workers from Hale and Whitford, the ones who watched Nora get fired and said nothing, the ones who laughed behind cupped hands, the ones who ate cake in the break room the day after she was marched out holding a cardboard box. They received cream-colored invitations on heavy linen stock, hand-delivered by men in black suits who did not smile and did not explain. Every single one of them showed up. Because when Dominic Valenti invites you to something, you don't RSVP maybe. Garrett Hale is here. He stands near the bar in his wrinkled Brooks Brothers suit with the crooked yellow tie, his thin, sandy hair lacquered desperately across his scalp, his reading glasses shoved up on his forehead. He received his invitation 3 days ago. A man in a black town car brought it to his office, waited while he opened it, and said nothing. Garrett was too afraid to decline. Smart man. First smart decision he's made in years. Marco Ferretti occupies a corner table, diminished and silent. His matte black DuPont lighter sits untouched beside his drink. He doesn't flick it open. He doesn't shift his weight. He barely breathes. Whatever conversation Dominic had with Marco after the warehouse, it stripped something fundamental out of him. He's still alive. That's the extent of his good fortune. As for Elena Morozova, the narration owes you this much. After the warehouse incident, Elena was found. She was brought before Dominic Valenti in a room with no windows and one chair. She is no longer part of the organization. Her slim gold Cartier bangle, her cream Valentino dress, her ice blue stare, none of it saved her. The details of what happened in that room are left precisely where Dominic left them, in the dark. But understand this, Elena Morozova learned exactly what happens when you target what belongs to Dominic Valenti, and she learned it permanently. Now, the entrance. The ballroom doors open and the sound dies like someone cut a wire. Nora Callahan walks in on Dominic Valenti's arm, wearing a custom emerald Tom Ford gown, size 20, with a plunging neckline that frames every single curve she was ever told to hide. The fabric drapes across her full, heavy thighs and clings to her broad hips and falls in a clean sweep to the floor, where custom Louboutin heels, red-soled and merciless, click against marble. Diamond earrings catch the chandelier light against her dark auburn hair, which falls in thick waves around her flushed, rounded cheeks. The faint cluster of pale freckles across the bridge of her nose is visible because she isn't looking down. Her gray-green eyes are level. Her shoulders are back. Her chin is up. Her arms hang at her sides, not crossed over her midsection, not clasped in front of her stomach. The thin silver wristwatch with the scratched face is gone. In its place, a diamond bracelet that costs more than Garrett Hale's house. She doesn't hunch. She doesn't apologize. She walks into that room like she built it. Garrett Hale sees her, and his face drains to the color of old paper. His watery blue eyes go wide. His Mont Blanc pen appears in his hand. Click, click, click. The nervous tick of a man watching his worst decision walk toward him in emerald silk. He's heard the rumors. Everyone in Chicago has heard the rumors. The woman he fired for taking up too much space now controls the financial architecture of a $1.2 billion empire. The spreadsheets he mocked her for run operations across 3 continents. Nora walks directly to him. She stops close enough that he can smell her perfume. She doesn't yell. She doesn't gloat. She speaks quietly, almost gently, and that's what makes it devastating. Anyone can learn a spreadsheet, Garrett, but nobody can learn what I do. She walks away. He stands there holding his Mont Blanc pen with shaking hands and nothing left to click. Halfway through the evening, Dominic stops the music. The entire ballroom turns. 300 people in silk and wool and diamonds go still. Dominic Valenti stands at the center of the room beside Nora, his charcoal Tom Ford suit sharp as a blade, the platinum signet ring engraved with a V catching light on his right hand. His dark brown eyes, almost black, sweep the room once. Then he takes Nora's hand. From his jacket pocket he produces a ring, not a subtle one, a statement. A $150,000 Patek Philippe commissioned platinum band with a center stone that throws light like a small sun. He slides it onto her finger in front of every person who ever whispered she's not one of us, every coworker who looked through her, every man who called her a liability. She is the only one of us that matters. 6 words. The room erupts. Marco Ferretti watches from his corner and says absolutely nothing. Nora looks down at the ring on her finger, looks up at the room full of people who dismissed her, feared her, tried to destroy her. She thinks about a woman in an oversized heather gray cardigan holding a cardboard box in a corporate lobby, shoulders hunched, eyes burning, trying to make herself smaller. That woman is gone. The woman standing here runs an empire, wears Tom Ford, and just brought a room of the most dangerous people in Chicago to their feet. She didn't lose a single pound. The world changed around her. Here's what nobody tells you about being invisible. It only works until someone with power actually looks. Nora Callahan was invisible because the world only sees what it expects to see, and what it expected was someone who didn't matter. Dominic Valenti saw what was actually there, and what was actually there was the most dangerous person in Chicago, who weighs 230 pounds, wears Louboutin heels, and takes up exactly the space she is meant to. Nora Callahan stands at the center of the Drake Hotel ballroom, a platinum ring on her finger, Dominic Valenti's arm around her waist, and she takes up all the space in the room. If you want to see what happens when the world underestimates the wrong woman again, subscribe now, hit the like button, and watch the next story.